Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our final session at Patient Congress 2021, Health Needs Navigation. My name is Melissa Williams, and I'm the Associate Director for Policy and Field Advocacy, and I have pleasure of introducing the presenters for our next session, which is focused on community organizing and how that can lead to policy and practice change. Before I turn it over to them, we're just going to go over our housekeeping items just one last time. Please submit any questions you have into the Q&A box on the control panel. We have closed captions available in this session, and if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please email npaf@npaf.org. And lastly, please join our conversation on social media with the hashtag #HealthNeedsNav. So it's my pleasure to turn it over now to my teammate, Mary McKira, who will go over the importance of community organizing. So Mary, take it away.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for that introduction. So as my colleagues have highlighted here today throughout Patient Congress, and especially today, is that the most powerful tool within grassroots organizing is the power of storytelling, especially when you can relate it back to your audience. And we want to make sure that we emphasize that we have a truly unique opportunity here to bring grassroots advocacy into the healthcare space, especially as it relates to the unique experiences with patients and caregivers. And how we're best able to do this is through effective grassroots organizing. And just to sort of go back with my background in organizing, what drew me to NPAF was their high focus on centering and amplifying the patient and caregiver experience. Within my experience in mainly political organizing and policy, this is something that you hear a lot, but it's not something that you actually see put into practice. And with NPAF, a lot of this centering and amplifying, it's not limited to campaigns. It really is embedded within the fabric of the organization, whether it's resources, hiring, partnerships. This is something that was so refreshing to me, to join an organization that really does have a high standard to uphold its mission through and through with everything that we do as an organization. So with that, I want to go into some of the major things we're going to be discussing today. So our key objectives here are going to be discussing our approach to advocacy, what grassroots organizing is, what effective organizing looks like, and how you are best able to utilize your unique story in our Health Needs Navigation campaign, which is kicking off this month. And you'll hear a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. So to start, our approach to advocacy is twofold. It's us having a person-centered approach and us being community-driven. And to sort of level set what this person-centered approach looks like, it's really about making sure that you are having intentional and specific conversations, tying in that personal element through the conversations that you have with people and building a personal connection to the initiative. When you're having a conversation with someone, it's important that you're not repeating talking points, because that gets boring. There's no personal connection to that, and people, they're going to forget it. They've forgotten as soon as you said it. You really are connecting the dots between how this issue impacts their community and ultimately them directly. And of course, us being community driven, while we are a national organization, one sentiment that we echo often is that you are the experts in your community. Nobody can talk to your community like you can talk to your community. You understand the nuances that exist there. And this grassroots approach is far more effective than having somebody from another state, another country, tell you what you need to do in your community, because that's incredibly frustrating, because they don't know you or your experiences or your community. And that's the best way that you're able to have a more direct impact and able to institute change. And looking at what grassroots organizing is, there are three major pillars that exist within grassroots organizing. We have the capacity building element, we have communication, and there's also accountability. So within capacity building, what that looks like is, as you guessed it, general recruitment, and of course, relationship building within that. So with relationship building, it's important that you're not recruiting for the sake of having numbers and to tell people, oh, well, I had 10,000 signups, or I had 50 signups in a town of 70. That sounds great, but if there's no backup or follow through with those numbers, it's ineffective and it doesn't really matter. You have to build these relationships. Having a direct conversation with someone can really motivate them to take action where they otherwise wouldn't, because you made that relational connection. And of course, if you really look at this from a tactical perspective, and if you talk to your mom or your sibling or a good friend of yours, you already have that foundational relationship, and bringing them in to this specific issue can really take it a step further, because they already have that built-in passion to support you and what your goals are within this initiative. And with communication, it has to be intentional and consistent. So with intentionality, sharing a personal story and why a certain thing matters to you really does draw your audience in. And if it's delivered well, it anchors them. Your communication should also be very consistent. You want to make sure that people are kept informed about the progress you're making. You want to make sure that you are sharing how their specific advocacy really helped move forward an issue and the latest actions they're able to take to continue on with that. If you think about it, to bring it back to our organizing days within politics, how strange would it be if we elect people into office and they don't tell us what they're doing? We want to make sure that our vote counts. We want to make sure that our time investment counts, and that we understand what's going on when we've committed to something. And of course, with accountability, our goals and metrics, we want to make sure that the goals are achievable. There's a lot of things that you put forward in the foreground for people to do, just quick actions they can take here and there every week. And there's also a lot more goal setting and metric tracking behind the scenes. But you want to make sure that when you're initially communicating these issues to your community, that these are achievable goals and it makes sense for your audience. Because maybe writing to your senator doesn't make sense in your community because maybe they don't like the senator and they don't want to do it, or they're like, oh, it's going to fall on ears that don't really care about this. You want to make sure that you're communicating in a way that makes sense. Maybe hosting a rally is a better way to get the attention of somebody, as opposed to writing a letter that may fall to the wayside. You also want to make sure that, again, going back to that communication piece with accountability and goal tracking and metrics, that you are sharing the successes. You want to share where you're falling short as well, and encourage your community to help you better achieve your goals. And next, we're going to talk about what effective organizing looks like. So I think every organizer and their mother has heard these three terms used over and over and over again. Effective organizing, it really is fairly simple. It's not too complex. I know with campaigns a lot of our volunteers have participated in this past year, we've got a bit more granular in exactly how we're able to organize. But high level, what it really takes is organizing, mobilizing, and engaging your audience. So when we talk about organizing, it's about starting early, building capacity, and being persuasive. With that persuasive piece, it's the best way that you're able to do that is, again, don't have generic talking points, really connect it, be disarming with sharing your story, sharing something that you know that the individual in front of you can connect to. And of course, with organizing, it's about starting early. So this health needs navigation campaign, for example, didn't happen overnight. This is not something that was, put together over the last 2 months. It started off as a conversation. Then there was extensive research that is still being surveyed and done. And this is something that will certainly take years to continue to build on, because the healthcare landscape is ever changing. So you want to make sure that when you're organizing, you're starting early, you build the capacity, and you are persuasive. With the mobilizing element here, you want to make sure that above everything, you really want to make sure that fellow advocates are educated on the issue, there are resources available for them to refer back to, and there is some level of training as well available to make sure that they're comfortable with the action that they're taking. In our previous session hosted by Martine, who's co-hosting this session with me here today, one really key thing that he spoke about here was, when you're sharing your story, you kind of want to run through it a little bit. You're identifying the challenge that exists within your story. You share the choice that you made. This was my challenge. I made the decision, a choice that I didn't like this challenge, and I don't want anyone else to face it. And then you go to that opportunity for action. So therefore, I'm going to take action. It's not enough for me to be upset about something. It's not enough for me to wish that something could change. You have to put action behind these emotions in order for there to be effective change. And of course, engaging your community, you have to know where your community stands on an issue. And you have to tailor the message to make sense to the person in front of you. One example I can provide is when I would be door knocking, getting people to care about a particular issue. If I'm knocking on a door and in front of me are a bunch of toys, they're small bikes, little swings, I'm going to assume maybe education is the most important thing for this person that I do not know. So I'm going to go there with the intention of opening up with who I am, why I personally care about education, and talking about how it can relate to them. So just really picking up little pieces here and there that takes time. And of course, with an engaging, outlining specific actions. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton to my colleague here, Martine Garcia from the campaign workshop, who is going to share some effective lobby to storytelling strategies with case studies that really hone in on that person-centered element. And Martine has extensive experience and political and initiative-based organizing, and for many years now has also led training and development for organizers, which is exciting for us to hear from, and political candidates as well. So we are in phenomenal hands, and we couldn't have asked for a better person to help lead this discussion.
Thank you so much, Mary. I am super excited to be here. I was just able to do a lovely breakout session with some of you all, and now I am back here to talk about something that, if you weren't in the first session, you know now that I really, really, really love storytelling and the power that storytelling has to connect across issues, across partisanship, across any type of difference. It is really such an amazing tool that organizers have used for a very long time. And now we're seeing everybody really use the idea of a personal story and how to connect that to a larger community, a larger challenge, a larger movement in the space. And so what I want to do is give you all a couple of examples. So as you all are doing the work and the volunteerism with National Patient Advocate Foundation, whether it's through the Be a Hero campaign, Caregivers Count, Needs Navigation, or Get Covered, there are always opportunities for you to engage other volunteers, recruit new folks, talk to your community, engage legislators through storytelling. And so I want to show you sort of how some other campaigns have really connected the dots for their advocates and their supporters through the power of storytelling, and that pivotal moment when they were like, oh, right, we just need to add a human face to these issues, and the sort of landslide responses that had come subsequently. Go ahead and click the next slide. So the first case study that I'm going to talk about was the case around marriage equality. And most of you probably, in one way or another, whether it was through the news or through engagement with folks in the LGBTQ space, have probably heard about this amazing campaign that happened over the span of about a decade. Back in in the early 90s, there was the initial sort of campaigns around LGBTQ rights and LGBTQ discrimination. And there were a couple key wins that happened in the judicial space that allowed for the campaign for freedom to marry to happen. And in the early 90s, around 1996, there was a court case that happened in Hawaii. And it was a court case where the circuit court in Hawaii deemed, or the state Supreme Court in Hawaii deemed it to be unconstitutional to discriminate on the basis of gender when it came to the institution of marriage. So that having same-sex marriage left out of was unconstitutional to be discriminated against in the institution of marriage. Well, when that happened, it set on a plethora of other dominoes. And after that, and over the course of about another decade, there were a number of different strategies that took place. Go ahead and click to the next slide. In the pursuit of the ability to change policy and to have the freedom to marry to become the law of the land, there were a lot of different tactics and strategies that were used. There were a number of different legal battles that happened all across the country, from the Hawaii case to cases in the Northeast. When a couple of the first state marriage campaigns were happening, they thought, well, if we can just get it through the court system, that's the fairest system we have. And if we left it up to the court of public opinion or to voters or to legislators, it likely would never happen because we don't have those hearts and minds on our side of the campaign. What they often saw then were failed legislative initiatives, some failed court appeals. And when they did have successful court judgments, they then saw citizen initiative ballots go on the up for election to revoke what the courts then said. So in Hawaii, what ended up happening was that they put a ballot measure on up for election, up for a vote of Hawaiians, to vote to say that the legislature was able to amend the Constitution to say that marriage should only be between opposite sex couples. And so there was this back and forth between winning in the legal space and losing in the court of public opinion. And so what happened in probably around 2010, 2008, 2010, there were a number of state campaigns that then we were running in the marriage fight to put pressure on legislators to show that there was support in the court of public opinion and that the public was on the side of marriage equality. However, what happened there in the messaging was where the sort of lesson here comes from. All of the campaigns leading up to about 2008, 2009 were all about the right to marry. It was all about these rights that the Constitution, whether it was through taxes or abilities that allowed married couples to be in charge of estates and medical decisions and all of these other pieces that came along with the institution of marriage, all of these other benefits. That's what the message was about, that we as same-sex loving couples should be allowed to have those rights and those benefits. Well, what they came to find out after losing a couple of campaigns is that message didn't work with the average person, or a person who either wasn't involved in the LGBTQ community or knew anybody involved in the LGBTQ community, because the way that they saw marriage was of love between them and their partner, or the husband and the wife. And so after a lot of testing and a lot of polling, they realized, oh, we can't just talk about the like wonky policy stuff. We actually have to put a face and some emotion into the campaign and the language that we're saying. And as soon as they swapped the messaging to the ability for us to love our partners and express that love to our families and our friends in a public way, and a commitment that is the institution of marriage, then all of the other folks sort of started to click for them. Like, oh yeah, they should totally have the right to express those vows and publicly disclose that they want to love this person for the rest of their lives, right? And so it was that idea of turning that messaging on its head and really focusing on that human experience of emotion and connectivity and values, that a person should have the ability to love their partner and engage in the institution of marriage because they love each other and they want to spend the rest of their lives together. That was a values-based framework that connected on emotion, and then that's when we started winning a number of different campaigns. And then through the judicial system, once it did get to the United States Supreme Court after long, hard fought battles and conversations to change those hearts and minds, it was through those powerful personal stories, whether on the ground in communities, to win those statewide campaigns, that it showed the United States Supreme Court that both legally and in the court of public opinion, the support was there to make marriage equality the law on the land. And so as you all think about bringing your folks along, it's utilizing those personal stories, as Mary mentioned, in a really connective and constructive way to change their hearts and minds and hopefully move them to take action. In this case, it was getting those folks to vote in benefit of freedom to marry whenever that ballot measure came up on the ballot. Next slide. So another case study that I want to talk about is one that I Am ALS and the ALS community has been doing for the last couple of years, back over the last last decade or so, but really sort of honing in on the piece that I'm talking about with I Am ALS that was founded about four or 5 years ago now, in their campaign to hold the FDA accountable for accelerating the search for treatment. ALS is a very, very harsh, terrible disease that they're doing a lot of work and research on. And over the last couple of years, there have been incremental successes in treatments that they have been testing, and the pharmaceutical companies have been coming up with and doing some clinical trials on. This particular instance, in this particular case, there was a treatment that in early case trial studies had shown some really positive results, but folks who have been diagnosed with ALS didn't have access to it because the FDA requires 3 trial tests and a particular amount of positive results to then allow it to get to public distribution. Well, what the FDA, what I Am ALS and the ALS community found was that through doing research funding and understanding what was happening in the treatment space, not only in their treatment space, but what was happening in other treatment spaces, they had found that the FDA had approved expanded access for another treatment that had very similar results to the treatment that to the drug test that was for ALS for Alzheimer's, and that the FDA did approve the early expanded access so that folks with Alzheimer's could get that treatment earlier than it would be than the FDA would approve for early access. Well, ALS was just asking for the same thing, and they kept getting shut down by the FDA because they weren't meeting these other requirements. And so what they did was they really honed in on, over the last couple of years, building out the community, educating folks on what ALS is, educating folks that they probably know somebody who is suffering from ALS, and the statistics around somebody who is diagnosed with ALS only lives about 3 to 6 years after diagnosis. And so they started collecting all kinds of stories, and with those stories, they were able to highlight much more attention. They were able to use those stories to talk to legislators. And ultimately, the founder of I Am ALS and his partner were able to, along with many other folks, researchers, doctors, and treatment folks, tell their story and advocate in front of Congress and get them to approve the early expanded access for that particular drug, and get the FDA to approve that. And so again, they were trying to go through the bureaucratic system, right? They were trying to do what people are telling them to do. And it wasn't until they had put that human face again and started building those grassroots relationships all across the country to get folks from coast to coast to be calling their Congress folks, to be calling their legislators, and really putting a face to the issues and the stats and the facts behind how ALS impacts patients, that they were able to get that groundswell of support, get that momentum going that they were able to testify in front of Congress, and that they were able to actually move policy that will hopefully benefit some of these folks who are suffering from ALS. So again, it was honing in on how do we see what is the process to change policy, and how do we add humanizing on top of it, right? Like, how do we add the storytelling component? It's not to say that only storytellings are going to win you the campaign or move the needle there, but what it does say is by layering in that human face, that human story, that emotionally connective component to an advocacy campaign or a legislative campaign, it pulls at those legislators' heartstrings, right? It really gets them invested and connected to the issue that you're talking about, that allows you to move the needle as is needed to be. And understanding that, like, both of these campaigns took a really long time, right? The marriage campaign started in '96, right? And then became the law of the land in 2018, I believe, right? So spanning over a lot of years, decades even, with ALS folks been fighting for treatment and access to treatment for a really long time. And this particular campaign did take about 2 or 3 years to get that early expanded access. And so thinking about the things that you all are doing now for needs navigation, which is a new campaign for you all, is this initial part of building that groundswell, of sharing your story to recruit more folks, so that when we do get to the place where there is policy and advocacy for you all to advocate on behalf of, it's not just you, right? It's you and your entire community who's calling your decision makers and your legislators, and they've already practiced how to tell their stories, so they're able to connect that and bring that emotional connective piece to their advocacy to layer into that policy ask and make it so much more powerful when we get to that point. So it's really sort of taking folks through this journey. The last thing I want to talk about is the user-generated content. And what user-generated content really is just content that we produce as people. Right? In the last couple of years, a lot of folks have started to just distrust traditional media, right? And we are seeing, both in the advocacy and the political space, but also in the general just marketing and consumer space, people are starting to utilize personal stories to build trust with their consumers and their constituents, because we trust each other. We just don't trust corporations, and we don't trust the media, right? And so by, again, humanizing what the product is, humanizing what the issue is, we are a source of trust as a messenger. And so we are going to be seeing a lot of, whether it's through the Bose video, if you've engaged with that before, whether it's through writing out your story, writing a poem, telling your story in some way, provides you as that really powerful messenger and a trustworthy one. It also allows people to envision their own lives, right? It allows them to see that transformative moment that turned you from somebody who was impacted by the healthcare system to somebody who is taking action to make the healthcare system better for themselves and others. And when you're able to show that journey for somebody, they're able to see themselves reflected in that journey, and hopefully then be empowered to also take action, right? And empowers everyone to be an influencer in their community, in their circles, in order for folks to take action. So when you see this word, user-generated content, it really means that we're just asking you to share your story in a way that we can then utilize it in other campaigns to build that trust, to allow folks to envision themselves doing those actions, and to make you an influencer within your community.
Thank you so much, Martine. That is powerful. The reality is, as Martine just mentioned, is that when we're able to hear from people on the ground, people with that specific, unique experience, that is the whole truth. There are so many experiences that have not been heard, and they don't want you to hear that because people don't like, fingers being pointed at them. But it's not necessarily about finger pointing. It's about acknowledging that there are gaps that exist because humans are fallible. Therefore, we make fallible systems. And every generation will continue to get better when we call it out, call the issue out, and call people in to make it better. And the only way to do that is to be honest about the issues that exist. So, Martine referenced this previously, and again in the session earlier. And he's said something really important, and I may butcher it a little bit, so please chime in if I do. But, he said, make sure that you're connecting your story to what that person or organization may value. There's so much power and so much strength in that. The same way that you wouldn't, for example, if you're telling a funny story that happened to you, you may say it to your friend differently than how you would tell your parents. You may, because you want to say certain things, change the lingo a little bit to make more sense to the audience that you're communicating that with. Same with legislators. There's a specific language, so a specific way that people talk and that people walk and they communicate, and you want to make sure that you're sort of adjusting to that. And thank you so much for echoing a lot of those same sentiments here. And we want everyone to take action. So donating your story to our Health Needs Navigation campaign is essential. Our primary goal here for this campaign is to embed financial and social needs navigation services within our healthcare systems. And while that seems like a high order, there's so much that you can do on the community level. And using these 3 words again, how you're able to organize this, how you're able to mobilize, and how you're able to best engage your community. So begin with who you know. For example, if you are a caregiver and you know that you could have benefited from financial and social needs navigation services, how invaluable that could be to you as a caregiver and to the person that you are caring for. Understanding with this mobilization part that your story is an effective resource. As Martine spoke in the previous session, and we referenced earlier here, identifying what the challenge is, the choice you're making as a caregiver to make it better, not only for yourself, but for caregivers at large, whether that's in your community, in your country, however that may look like. And the choices that you are going to be making, not only on an individual level, but as a community. What decision are you going to make? What type of a community do you not only want to live in, but what community do you want people after you to exist in? And with engagement, understanding how your specific community needs can tie into these campaign actions. So, if there's a specific campaign action that says, write an op-ed or write a letter to the editor, whichever way makes sense for your community. Sometimes it's people don't read the paper there, and maybe you just post something in a local bakery, because everyone goes to this bakery, everyone knows this shop, and at least 20 people a day are going to see this. That is your building noise around this naturally. You may not see it, but it's there. And that's a strong way to really understand, okay, what does my neighborhood typically do? What do I typically do within a day? What places do I go into? And make sure that you're engaging and reaching people where they are. So to go into the campaign calendar here, we have our Health Needs Navigation campaign that kicked off on September 30th. And next week, we have our week of action. So after the close of today, this evening, you're going to be receiving a follow-up email. And of course, we will share with you the campaign webpage that you're able to learn more about how you can participate. And there's also a campaign toolkit where you can get started on how to really get this going in your specific community as well. And we have different actions that you could take. And we have our campaign digest that we send out weekly with additional actions. And one thing we want to make sure that we highlight here is that if you want something to change, if you want to be influential, it starts with one person. It always has, and it always will. And there's no small action, and there's no small way that you can have an impact. I will say some of the most compelling stories that come out of grassroots organizing are the ones where you just see one person on the street with a sign by themselves. People are more drawn to those stories than, I mean, of course they are to larger stories as well, but that makes its rounds more, and people are more interested by that one person living in a community where that seems so far-fetched. And if you reach one person, that is awareness built, and that is support solidified. So don't take for granted the one person that you may reach. That is significant and that is impactful. And one of my heroes in life, one of my biggest inspirations is the late Congressman John Lewis. And his words and his legacy, frankly, are one of the main reasons why I even stay in advocacy. It's an incredibly fruitful thing to be a part of, but it's also very exhausting. And I don't think anyone can say it better than individuals like himself and individuals who had organizations like NPAF. And I want to leave you with his words that speak directly to what we're trying to accomplish with this campaign. Sometimes you have to not just dream about what could be. You get out and you push and you pull and you preach. And when I look at this quote and I look back on a lot of his legacy, I think of our volunteers. I think about Maureen Stewart. I think about Tony K. Mangskow. I think about Michael X. I think about Mary Stabile. I think about Jamie Stokely. I think about everyone. And wow, what a tough life of advocacy that you are committed to, but the impact is immeasurable. These are real lives that you're changing. And just want to make sure that I leave you all with that. So I will go ahead and pass this to Melissa for the Q&A.
Thank you both for sharing just such a beautiful presentation, and just I think you guys really got to the heart of what we are trying to do here at NPAF and in Volunteer Network. Our goal here is to bring a movement, right, to the healthcare space. We want to really make sure that your voices are the reasons why we get needs navigation embedded into our healthcare system. So I think I'll put a plug in for questions, to please enter them into the chat. I do have one teed up here for both Mary and Martine. It was something that had come up in our kickoff call last week for our Health Needs Navigation campaign. And one of our volunteers had asked, you know, with these campaigns and when it comes to organizing, like, how do you not rock the boat when in terms of like getting, you know, partisan or political? And I'm wondering, Martine and Mary, if you can speak a little to, you know, about just, you know, avoiding the politics.
Happy to. I think what you need to think about, and particularly I think this is where storytelling comes in handy, is that you're sharing a personal story to you that connects to the community, right? And specifically right now for health needs navigation, there is no policy yet written in which you are advocating on either side of, right? And so you're able to still build the groundswell and build the message and controlling the narrative to say that this is an issue that impacts across race, across gender, across socioeconomic status, across partisanship, right? You right now have the power to decide that this is something that everybody should be involved in and that impacts everybody, because at some point or another, everybody is going to engage with the healthcare system in one way or another. And by starting the narrative in that space and utilizing your stories to show the variety of different ways that this is impacting individuals across the spectrum, right? allows you to hopefully start it out of the very divisive political space we are in now and keep it there. And again, when you sort of go back to that values framework, when you go back to what's at stake, that hopefully also pulls it out of that like in the brain issue-based, fact-based, right, divisive politics-based land, and brings it back into like reality and like human day-to-day lives. And so keep doing that and keep remembering that sharing your story is not political, right? It is connecting on a human level that hopefully gets us back to a place, or at least moves us to a place where we're seeing each other as humans and not just D's or R's.
Definitely. I completely agree with everything Martine said. And ultimately, I think it's important that we recognize two things. Nearly everything in this life is political, and not everyone is going to get on board, regardless of how positive your initiative may be. And, you know, a lot of topics are incredibly sensitive to talk about, either because there's trauma associated with it, or because people are simply going to disagree for the sake of disagreeing. And I think with this in particular, with health needs navigation in particular, how to depoliticize it is, as Martine had mentioned, bring it back to the high level goal. Some people, for one example that I like to give is, if you retain an attorney, you are not expected as the attorney's client to know everything that your attorney knows. How unfair would that be? How unfair is it for you to get someone who is a professional, who went to school for this, who has practiced for however many years, who knows where to go to look for information, and have that attorney expect you to be on their level? That is not going to happen. We all have our skill sets. Well, as smart as we all may be, it is just not possible unless we get that, unless we do what they did. And we applying that to the healthcare system, being a provider, being a health navigator, whatever that may look like, being a patient or a caregiver, you either have that unique lived experience or that specific learned experience. And communicating sort of those differences that exist, saying, you know what, I just don't really know where to go for help, or I had this happen to me or someone in my community, and I want to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else, or people know where to go. Have that point of contact, have this be normal and embedded into these systems, and really deconstruct this idea that everything has to have a political attachment to it. And you're not going to get everyone, but I think just acknowledging that within yourself and bringing examples that can directly speak to the people that you're communicating with is strong. Because when you're able to just really make it, you know, super simple as far as, okay, well, I'm not an attorney, I know I'm going to need one, you know, for whatever situation. I think that certainly helps ease the conversation, and not to be combative as well. And honestly, one thing that always works is just, as cliche as it may sound, is just being kind, and really bringing yourself and your personal experiences to it as it fits. You don't have to, you know, dump your entire story there, but just high level talking points that make sense, and that typically will capture people's attention there.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm reminded of a couple things as you guys have been talking, but I follow a lot of hashtag Ned Twitter, and I think a lot of other patient advocates do as well. And there is one doctor, her Twitter handle is @GradyDoctor, who I've been noticing over the past year. She practices out of Atlanta. She's a Black physician, and she has made it her personal, I guess, just form of advocacy to educate people in her community, Blacks who are inherently distrustful of the healthcare system, to educate them about the COVID-19 vaccine, or the vaccine, and talk about why it's important to get vaccinated, or hear exactly why. She uses the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I've been following her threads for, yeah, as I said, over this past year, and she posts these really meaningful conversations that she has, and they're like short stories, like a dialogue that she has. And there was something that I saw that she had retweeted last week where someone who she doesn't know saw her image and was just like, this doctor is responsible for me getting the vaccine. And I think that is just an example of storytelling, connecting with people at an individual level, having conversations, and and using that to educate them and help them make that choice, that informed decision. And as you all were talking, I was just thinking about that. I urge everyone to follow her, to give her a follow. She's great. And I just think that that is just something we really want to emulate here with our health needs navigation campaign. We can have those same conversations with people when we're waiting in line at the grocery store, or we're waiting in the waiting room, where we know people are already interacting with the healthcare system. I know some of our volunteers have already shared that's what they do. And more of you having those conversations, and more people, saying like, you know what, yeah, that's the experience I had too, and that shouldn't happen to me. That's enough to build that, I guess, that domino effect to eventually organize and get the attention of the policymakers that we need to influence to make sure that we embed needs navigation as part of healthcare. So I think we are at time. I wanted to just thank Martine and Mary for a wonderful final session. I've been seeing some comments come into the chat, just saying what a great way to close Patient Congress. Love the visuals. So just wanted to share that with you all, because I know you can't see, but thank you all. And at this time, we are going to turn it over to Rebecca Angove and Rebecca Kirch, who will have final remarks here as we close out Patient Congress. So I want to make sure that they are ready. And as they're getting ready, I will just tee up that we would love for you, as we've mentioned on our previous days, to share your feedback with us. We will be including a survey in our email that goes out later, but you will also see it pop up once you close out the webinar today. Please let us know how we did. We cannot improve unless you let us know where the shortcomings were. Going back to Mary's slide, right, about how the importance of, goals and metrics, your feedback is incredibly important. So please let us know how we did. And I just personally want to thank you all for spending these past 3 days with us. It's not the same as being in the room, but I love seeing your comments come into the chat. I love the questions that were asked, and just thank you so much.